A couple of weeks ago we noticed that Intertek is about to release a new version of their X-908 Infini2 cases, but this time in white. So a very big thank you to Intertek for providing us with one of these. And let's open this puppy up now and see what it has in store for us. But before we get started with the video, I recently sold my kidney to get one of these, a Lumix S5. So with a bit of editing magic, you will now be able to enjoy my ugly ass face in 4K 60 glory. This episode is brought to you by cdcovers.com. CD Covers offers a wide variety of software or game keys for a fraction of the usual retail price. You can get your usual PC game codes or even library codes for things like Steam, Uplay and Origin. But the most important part for us are the software codes. Here we can get software activation codes for things like MS Office or Windows 10 for a ridiculously cheap price. And right now you can not only use the promo code TS20 to get a 20% discount, but you can also combine that with their Black Friday sale to make the Windows 10 license even cheaper and then even cheaper. If you want to get that nasty activation message away, make sure to head down to the links in the description below and don't forget to use the promo code TS20 and combine it with the Black Friday sale, which ends on the 18th of December. So while I'm opening the box, let's go over the usual boring stuff first. This is a full tower case, so support for up to E80X motherboard size, support for up to 420mm GPU length, which may come in handy with these new 390s, up to 160mm CPU height, so things like the Be Quiet Dark Rock Pro 4 will fit without an issue, pretty massive feet with a respectable clearance, 7 reattachable PCIe brackets, a separate power supply tunnel, 6 drive spots, 2 2.5-inch brackets behind the mainboard, 2 drive bays for 2.5 or 3.5-inch drives behind the power supply, and pre-drilled screws for another 2 2.5-inch drives next to the mainboard. And finally, a 4mm thick tempered glass side panel. Okay, with the boring stuff out of the way, let's talk about the interesting things. For what we could find on the spec sheet, this X-908 is an exact copy of the original X-908, just with the white coating. Now we do not have one of these to double check, but we would assume that there should be no other great difference except for the coating. But when it comes to the color, Intertek called it a silk touch coating, and even though there is no real definition of what that actually means, touching it does resemble a bit like touching a freshly waxed car. Anyway, to address the elephant in the room, let's get to the infinite RGB mirror as the front panel. And what is that to say? Just like the original one, it is a complete eye-catcher. It looks great, lights up in whatever color you want it to, and lets you question if you really need that other lighting source in your room. And to control all of this, we have this little RGB button here that lets you switch between the different RGB modes or the software control, or simply shut everything off. So for those who do not have a RGB header on their mainboard, you are also covered. And all of this, and even more, comes from this little PCB here in the back. Now we already had a bunch of cases with built-in fan or RGB controllers, but this really packs everything we need. In here we can come in with a PVM and a 5V addressable header from the mainboard, which supports the usual suspects, MSI Mystic Light, that ASRock thing, Asus Aura and whatnot. Now from there we are able to hub everything to 5 individual PVM fans, 5 RGB devices like fans, and 2 strips. Now out of the box this thing is already pretty populated. The 2 strips ports are already packed, as we have one in the front on the PSU tunnel and the other one is responsible for the RGB mirror in the front. Of the 5 RGB devices, already 3 are used because, and I would definitely consider this to be a major plus, Intertek already pre-installed 3 fans, 2 on the top and 1 in the back, of which all of them are RGB. So out of the box you will get the whole mirror thing, the stripe and 3 120mm RGB fans, which even though the fans are not really super quiet or extremely good, But still, 3 included RGB fans are nothing case manufacturers usually do, so great thing there. Now something I would most definitely mention about the controller is power, because this may already be in use in other cases, but I have never seen it so far and it took me quite a long time to figure this one out. Instead of the usual SATA port that is just slapped on the PCB, the end of the port where it says SATA is the female portion of the plug. So you would basically take the SATA port and press it as hard as you can until it swallows the bottom section of the PCB. I don't know if it is standard practice elsewhere, but for those who didn't know, here you go. Now coming to a part that I cannot really wrap my head around. Let's take a look at the I/O. This thing comes pretty packed. With the usual stuff, Intertek also slapped 2 USB 3.0 Type A and 2 USB 3.0 Type C, so as far as cases are concerned, this is pretty much as good as it gets. Of course, there are USB 3.2 and here and there on cases, but that's not usually the case. Anyway, there is just something about this case where Intertek really had an eye for the detail, and we will see more examples of this in the future, but there are just these small things that give you that perception of a premium product. Like the box, for example. Instead of the usual grey box with black text on it, they actually took the time and money to paint it white and put every feature on it, more information, spec sheet, a nice image, so it's already something. And the same is with the I/O. They took the time and the money, even though probably a couple of cents, to put these little dirt blockers on there. I'm sure this doesn't make a dent in their budget, but it's these little things that just make you go, nice. So coming back to that weird thing. Next to the I/O we have these little switches. And with them we can manually control the fans to be turning low, high or just off. And usually I'm a very big fan of having switches for basically everything. But in this case you have to choose to either use the PWM controller or the switches. And according to the text printed on the 3-pin extension that come out of these switches, they are meant to be used for top fans. So if you would for some reason need to immediately make the fans go crazy, you would need to open the software, do it then, and then come back to the case and hit the switches. And I can just not wrap my head around that. It's so inconvenient. And for me it would only make sense if the switches would act as an override for the PWM controller. So basically having an additional input on the controller where you could override whatever the mainboard says. To, for example, give full throttle or stop or just listen to the mainboard. And that would be so intuitive. But yeah, you have 2 different fan controllers. And just to make it a bit more complicated, the right switch can be hooked up to 2 fans and the left one to 1. So yeah. Anyway, let's get over the airflow because that's a big topic. So to get one thing out of the way, there is a 120 spot in the back. Just like any other case, you can mount the rad on it and it behaves like any other spot in the back. But the rest is a big mysterium, because it combines the best I've seen so far with one of the worst. Let's start with the top, which we think is one of the best. On the top we have this indentation around it, which just adds a little design flair. I like it, but that's up to you. But unlike the magnetic little sheet that we usually get, in here we have a whole click-in system where once you press the sides it pops up and we can remove the complete piece, which by looking at it already seems to be letting a lot of air through. And now you have all the clearance you need to work on your fans and maybe even your radiator. And on the compatibility side, we can hook up to 3 120 fans and 2 140 fans, as well as a up to 280 radiator, which should not make any issues because the mainboard placement is pretty low. But even though this probably doesn't perform any better than the usual sheet, it just feels sturdy, it gives you the sense of a quality product, and it kind of deserves its price tag. So from the top side, great. Now when it comes to the front, we do not yet have a standardized test for these things, but already from looking at it, even though they tried everything with the 3 120 spots and the up to 360 rad, don't get me wrong, It will work perfectly fine and your PC will not overheat at all, but I'm just saying that other cases will perform better. If we take a look at the front, the air is provided by these little cutouts which are spanning both sides, from top to bottom. Now the issue starts with the mirror piece in the front, because that unit is so freaking deep into the front panel that half of each cutout is already blocked by that. Now, not completely blocked off, but the air would have to travel around two corners to get into the fan. It will work, of course it will, but it just won't be performing perfectly. Another issue is with how big the air pocket in the front of the fans is. And 1.5 centimeters from the fan to the completely sealed off front, this case will have the same issue as the V3 had, where the air it gets into the case, but it's just a fraction of the air. So airflow as a total. We can hook up to 7 fans, 1 in the back, 3 in the top and 3 in the front, with reds on each spot. So all in all, the airflow or the cooling capacity is not bad, but the front could definitely be upgraded. Okay, so having all of these out of the way, let's build something in it and see afterwards how it holds up our expectations. But first, well, that power supply is done. So, after having built it, what can I say? Well, let's get the obvious thing out first. The machine will not boot. And that's not because of the case, but as you may have seen in the time-lapse, there is an issue with the 24 pin of the PSU, where once we pull it down, it works, but after releasing it was gone. So maybe that's because of the cable, maybe it's because of the plug, we just don't know right now, and we had to short out the PSU cable so that everything lights up and shines as it's supposed to. And of course I didn't plug in the GPU because this is our newest and never used before 3070, which I just won't risk for the sake of this video. So from here on now, let's just pretend that the PC is working fine and everything is alright. So, pros and cons and what could have been better. Let's start with the cable management. Of course, the case is giant from the inside, so we had a ton of space to work in, which was really great. The cable cutouts around the main board are alright, but at this price point, I think they could have added something like a hiding bracket like you have on some of the NZXT cases. Something worth mentioning is that initially I thought that routing the 4-pin cable to the CPU would be an issue, but the hole behind the main board is so big that the cable just slided right in and there is absolutely no issue to get whatever cable you need wherever you need it. Behind the main board, the space was okay, but for my taste it could have been a bit bigger, especially considering the size of the case. So for a future version, I think small cutouts are a bad idea. You should have a big one with a hiding plate. Another thing that is definitely a pro are the included goodies. You will get a bunch of screws which are already in silver to match the color a bit, a couple of zip ties and a RGB cable for the PCB in the back. Something that really helped me out with this build is the fact that they've included a USB 3.0 to 2.0 adapter because our main board only has one. And of course you need two for the front I/O. And the most obvious thing would be the GPU holder. And that's a really great addition, especially because these new RDX 3000 cards are just massive. But if you would have a Founder Edition card, you may tend to think that the placement would block off your power cables. But Intertek has your back, because you can move the whole thing a bit to the right and a bit to the left, so no issue there. But for a possible future version, I would have loved to be able to mount the whole thing in the front of the GPU, especially because these 3090s are just massive, and the worst sagging would probably be at the very end of the card. So a couple of holes in the front and this thing is already much better. Now back on the airflow subject. I love the top, I really do. And even the dust filter for the PSU got some attention because they didn't use the usual metal sheet, but one of these slidable pieces which are a bit more robust. But the front airflow, even without any fans in here, I am so certain that it is far from perfect. So in future versions, maybe try making the front piece a bit bigger so you can move the mirror unit a bit away from the fans, which probably makes it already much better. A small side note for the feet. Size perfect, clearance perfect, but for future versions maybe try to paint them in the same color as the rest, because if we put the top and the bottom next to each other, they just don't come in the same color. And next up would be design, and that's just up to the person buying it. If you really want to go with a white build, great, I think the case looks great and the whole RGB thing is perfect, but in the end the question if it looks good will always be answered by the buyer. But one thing to keep in mind is that you will definitely need to try to match the color scheme in here. We've waited with the case until we received our Gigabyte 3070 in white, just to have a white card to slap in here and show that this really looks good in here. And of course you can use black cards too, but maybe try to limit your used colors to 2 or 3, because it will start to look ugly at some point. And don't be like me and use a PSU with rainbow cables, that's just wrong. So colors in use is something that you really should keep in mind in here. Okay. Overall, I really like the case. I think it looks good and is compatible with basically everything. And the only thing that I would call bad is the front airflow. But with some decent cooling or maybe even a radiator, that shouldn't be so much of an issue. Now coming to the price. The case is available here in Europe for around 110 euros in white and 103 euros in black. So it's on the upper side when it comes to cases. And it is one of the most expensive ones that Intertek is offering overall. Now, there are many cases that even in white are less expensive, but I think the price is mainly due to the front mirror and the whole RGB thing that they've put in here. And I really don't know how much it takes to build something like that, so it would be up to you to decide if this is worth $100 for you or not. So myself, I really like it, I think it would make a great white build, and I would definitely consider it if I wanted to do a white build. But that's up to you. So, this should basically sum up the review for the Intertek X-908 in white, or mostly in black because it's the same thing. We will put the manufacturer links down in the description below, and maybe some Amazon links for Germany, because I don't think on the US market that you have it. But anyway, we'll put the manufacturing links for the white and the black version down in the description below. So if you want to take a look at it, there you have it. And maybe you want to leave your opinion with a thumb up or thumb down and even a comment below. And maybe you also want to consider subscribing and hitting that bell icon, because apparently Intertek just bought so much of that white color and that they had to start painting all their components in white. So for next week we have another Intertek product. But until then, you may want to have a look at one of these totally random videos.